Started. Uh, Good afternoon. This is Transportation Committee Chair Deb Barber. It is Monday, February 22nd, 2021. Before I call this meeting to order, I'd like to say a few things about how we will conduct this meeting. I want to acknowledge that COVID-19 is calling all of us to alter our usual procedures. As we know, Governor Walz has declared a peacetime emergency in response to COVID-19, and the Met Council has determined it's not practical or prudent to conduct an in-person committee meeting for the reasons stated in the governor's emergency executive order. Accordingly, Met Council members will participate in this meeting by phone or other electronic means, and this Transportation Committee meeting will be conducted under Minnesota Statutes 13D.021. Because we are conducting the meeting electronically, all votes must be taken by roll call. Before we start the meeting, we need to establish whether there is a quorum. With that, Jenna, could you call the roll, please?
Chambliss, Cummings, Ferguson,
Here.
Fredson,
Here.
Gonzalez,
Here.
Sterner, Zarin, Barber.
Here. Having a quorum present, I call to order the meeting of the Metropolitan Council Transportation Committee for February 22nd, 2021. Our first order of business is approval of the agenda. If there are no changes or additions to the agenda, we can just proceed. Seeing none, we'll go with that. Our agenda is approved. Next is approval of the minutes. We need to approve the minutes from the February 8th, 2021 meeting. Does anyone have any changes or additions? Not. I entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
Councilmember Fredson will move approval.
It's moved by Fredson. Is there a second?
Second by Gonzalez.
Second by Gonzalez. Is there any other discussion? Seeing and hearing none. Jenna, could you call the roll, please?
Chambliss, Cummings,
Aye.
Ferguson,
Aye.
Fredson,
Aye.
Gonzalez,
Aye.
Sterner, Zarin, Barber.
Aye. And that minutes are approved. Next, we move on to our tab report. We have Mr. Dugan here tonight.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everyone, members of the committee, of the Transportation Committee, the honorable members, I should say, General Manager Quaistra, Director Thompson, and of course, Jenna. And also, I see Chief Frizzell is here. How do you do, sir? I'll be listening forward to your report. Listening for your report. You're welcome, sir. As I said before, Chief, you have many friends in the law enforcement community, and they regard you highly. Regarding MnDOT, the additional COVID funding is being reviewed for options for distribution because, unlike prior funding, these COVID-related funds will be available for operations, not just projects. The MPCA is in the midst of its Clean Cars rulemaking, which it began on December 21st with an announcement to do so. This week, today, and tomorrow from 3 until 6 p.m., an administrative law judge is taking public comments on the rule. And also the governor's climate subcabinet will be meeting in March, hosted by MnDOT. The subject is clean fuel. Regarding the MAC, and again, I bring this up because honorable members, you may get questions on these kind of things from your constituents. Right now, and this is the member from the MAC emphasized this, at this time, the CDC is not requiring COVID testing on domestic flights. It still is and does require COVID testing for any passenger coming to the United States from a foreign country. Delta is resuming once weekly flights to Amsterdam, and why that's important is because Delta itself is opening a COVID testing facility at the end of Concourse G. So before one flies to Amsterdam or wherever it's expanded to, if the person tests negative, they can fly. If they test positive, they are taken to a secure facility and retested. If it's negative, they can fly. If positive, they go into quarantine. And it is recommended that anyone who's had a vaccine carry their vaccine card. Regarding domestic testing, aircraft passengers, the TSA announced that 4.03 million travelers flew over the president's weekend. That is nationally. And the CDC and TSA will continue to monitor it. And if it continues to increase, they may require domestic testing. And low-cost carriers, Sun Country and Allegiant, are expanding flights and aircraft. And before I go on, Madam Vice Chair, I apologize. I did not welcome you. I just see you now. Sorry about that. Tab business items on your March 8th meeting, you're going to have 2 streamlined tip amendments and then also a scope change. And just to refresh on scope change, it's when a project is applied for in the regional solicitation, that project description becomes the scope. And if there's any changes to that, it needs to be approved. The most simple being administrative, something very minor like adding benches and waste cans. Then it moves up to informal, which is something like an intersection, changing the traffic signal to a roundabout, or combining 2 tab projects. The most important, though, are the formal ones, where that goes under a full review, and that's such as changing the number of travel lanes, bridges, or an off-road bike path or an on-road. The other matter that came up from a policy end of things at the tab is a program year change. As I'm sure you know, the tab policy is there can only be 1 program year change per project and only allowed 1 time. There was an exception to be asked for in this. There will be future discussion in the tab about this. The sentiment is not to change, but to take each exception on its own. And this exception arose in the context of a project shifting from an environmental assessment to an environmental impact statement. This process is overseen by the EPA under a law called the National Environmental Policy Act. And just for your review, an environmental assessment is a short, concise review of the project and how it impacts the environment. There's no cumulative or geographic context to this. The results of this initial inquiry is either no significant impact, or it's called a FONSI, finding of no significant impact, or significant impact. If it is the latter, then it goes into an environmental impact statement, which is a comprehensive review, a hard look at the cumulative impact on the environment from the successive stages of the project, and also its impact on any and all area under development or reasonably foreseen to be under development. Examples of an environmental impact statement would be the Mall of America or rethinking I-94. And it is also triggered if the federal environmental law considers a series of individual projects connected. As of today, Ms. Schallberg will be going through the safety performance measure targets, which we did at TAB. And the next item on your agenda is the equity presentation, which was done at TAB by Roderick Southall, one of your colleagues at Met Council. And TAB will be addressing equity and transportation in each of its successive meetings. And lastly, for the TAB Executive Committee, elected as first vice chair is Hennepin County Commissioner Debbie Gattell from District 5, which includes member Cummings, Richfield and Bloomington, and member Ferguson's Eden Prairie. And the second vice chair is Mayor Mark Winchell of Chaska, who is in Barbara's district. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Peter. Are there any questions from council members? All right, seeing none. Thank you again very much. Next, we're on to reports. We have Metropolitan Transportation Services Director Thompson first.
Madam Chair and members, a couple updates this week. The 2021 Minnesota Transportation Conference is coming to a virtual conference on March 9th to March 11th. At this annual conference that started a few years ago, There will be speakers and sessions on a variety of transportation topics for all modes of transportation and for emerging transportation issues. MTS and Metro Transit staff will have presentations and studies that are presented at several sessions at this conference. And most of what we are presenting are items that have been before this committee. It's, of course, a virtual conference this year. There are opportunities as Transportation Committee members. You could register for single day registration if you have time and are interested. There are a lot of interesting information about what transportation, not just among the council, but MnDOT, our local partners, and some good national speakers. So registration program information can be found at the University of Minnesota conference registration site, or you can reach out to Jenna and she can send you a link also. As a COVID update, we've only had good news, only one new COVID positive test since the last committee meeting. So trending very good in that location. We are, again, continuing to prepare for the vaccine. Last week, we sent all our private contractors and our suburban providers draft agreements that they will fall under so that their staffs can be vaccinated through the council's process that we're developing. The council is coordinating all the public transit worker vaccinations for the region, including our private contractors and suburban providers. And then finally, last week, we had over 10,000 healthcare essential worker trips on Metro Mobility, 10% growth just over the last time I reported to you, which is reinforcing the need that we had to start to implement fares for those essential workers starting on March 1st. So late last week, we started notifying those that are using the service for healthcare worker travel and their employers who have been really good at communicating the service out to their workforce. And today we started to notify the media through press releases and communications that have started to go out today. So we will continue to offer the service for healthcare workers for now, but they will start to pay a fare, which I think will affect the demand some, so that we want to make sure that we have capacity for our regular Metro Mobility customers who are itching to come back to the service if they haven't yet, and they're beginning to be vaccinated and expect them to come back. So with that, Madam Chair, that concludes my remarks. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Director Thompson. Councilmember Chambliss.
Yes. So I'm assuming that the benefit that the healthcare workers had, I'm having a hard time talking today, the healthcare workers had from in using Metro Mobility was kind of like an extra benefit. We had the extra capacity in terms of the availability of the buses. So there's no hardship as a result of them having to pay. Is that correct?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Councilmember, that's a great question. I'll start you back to when we started this service last summer. We had been cutting back a lot of the fixed route service. And so we felt that this was needed, especially the overnight service for those healthcare facilities served by light rail and others. The hours had been reduced in service. So this was a supplemental service that we added so that they could get to work. And a lot of those fixed route services have started to come back, are at a higher level than they were last August. And so, we also had the capacity. And so we wanted to make sure that capacity was used because there was a benefit to keeping our contracted work drivers employed in case when the Metro Mobility ridership came back. And so we're now just back at that transition phase where we need to we've really looked at it. We do think that most of these workers have a good fixed route option available to them now today, whereas they maybe did not last August. And so we expect that some of them will transfer back to fixed route, which is also a lower transit fare on fixed route than it is on Metro Mobility. So there's some benefits for them to transfer back to fixed route.
Councilmember Chambliss.
Oh, go ahead, Molly.
Go ahead, Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Council Member. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make the comment, really more than a question, that I think that this was a thoughtful and creative pivot in the middle of the pandemic that really offered a service that we could, and we could keep operators employed, and we could help those who are dependent on transportation and perhaps lost some or perhaps didn't. It just as, you know, as we all say over and over and over, we're all in this together. And I think this was really a good example of how we can provide a service that doesn't harm us, that helps me. And so I am to you, Nick, and to the rest of your team for coming up with this plan. And I understand the reasons, and it's appropriate, I think, to make the change now that things are changing again. So again, just my thanks for doing that. I think it was a very creative, thoughtful, and beneficial service to offer, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
We appreciate that, and I know our staff is actually really excited to work on it and design it. You know, feel that they're really contributing to the core workers during this pandemic has been very rewarding, both for our staffs and contractors to be able to provide this service.
Good, thank you. Councilmember Chambliss, did you have another comment? You're on mute.
I'll wait until we get the GM report.
Okay. All right. Anything else for Dr. Thompson? All right. Seeing none, we'll move over to you, General Manager Koistra. You're on mute.
Well, after a stellar start, we'll go on with the COVID update. We've had a total of 369 employees now diagnosed with COVID from March 2020 through yesterday, and the figure includes 8 new cases since the committee met last on February 8th. Metro Transit bus and rail services are not experiencing service impacts due to COVID leave, and we're seeing a drop in cases like all other sectors have seen a drop in cases. With respect to vaccines, since the last Transportation Committee meeting, Metro Transit and Council leadership have met with vaccine planners from MDH and the 1B phase of allocations, about the 1B phase of allocations that includes public transit workers. As shared previously, our initial vaccine plan was submitted to MMB in January. The state has not yet announced the timing of phase 1B, but we do have a contractor and a site secured for distribution. So we will be able to quickly respond once those vaccines become available. Metro Transit has continued to search for and promote other opportunities for employees, including through the Department of Veterans Affairs and the Native American tribal communities. And finally, we have been promoting to employees the new online state vaccine connector for pre-registration and scheduling information. Since December 1, Metro Transit has made free on-site and take-home COVID tests available to our on-site essential employees at their work sites. To date, about 1,500 tests have been completed through this opportunity. We continue to recommend that on-site essential employees complete weekly COVID tests to help minimize spread. These tests have identified so far 6 asymptomatic and pre-symptomatic cases that may have led to unnecessary spread had they gone undetected. The partnership started with Health Partners for free employee testing at Drive Up, and Haywood Well Work Clinic is also ongoing and doing well. Secondly, the Metro Transit we're preparing to hire new bus operators for the first time in a year. This is going to be a small effort because, as you know, we started out with a bus operator shortage. We don't want to repeat that, and so we've had probably over 200 operators who've separated either because they've retired, they've transferred, or they have received promotions. So we're starting this out slowly, but we don't want to find ourselves in a situation again where we have an operator shortage. Next month, Adam Harrington will be providing the committee with a service update, and as part of this update, Brian Funk will also provide an operator staffing update, so you'll get more information on this. And then finally, I wanted to mention that Network Next BRT outcomes presentation is on Wednesday, February 24th at the Metropolitan Council meeting. BR staff will present an information item on Network Next BRT plan outcomes at this week's meeting, and the presentation includes recommendations on the next 3 arterial bus rapid transit lines. That includes F line along Central, G line, Rice and Robert, and H line, Como and Maryland. So you'll get the full presentation on that at the next council meeting. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Wes. Are there any questions from council members? All right, Councilmember Chambliss.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone for their updates. It's always good to have that information because we can't be in all the meetings. So that's really a premium and it's efficient way of getting information. I'm really excited about the BRT proposals that are happening through Network Next. And taking a look at the different paths as a result of Network Next, and also some of the options that we're looking at as we're doing the Blue Line extension planning for BRT as well. So it's very encouraging to see how we are planning way in advance for how we're going to have interconnectedness throughout the region with our light rail and our buses and serving the community. So kudos to everyone who saw that as a need and an importance and executing it.
Thank you. Any additional questions or comments from council members? All right, thank you, Wes. We can move on to our business items. We don't have anything on consent tonight, so our first business item is business item 2021-53, procurement of 143 biodiesel 60-foot transit buses. And we have Brian Funk here. Welcome.
Hello, Madam Chair. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes, we are.
All right, thank you. So as stated, I am here today seeking that first the Transportation Committee and then the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute a contract with New Flyer of America Incorporated to provide 143 base order biodiesel 60-foot transit buses with options for up to 29 additional replacement and expansion buses in an amount not to exceed $121,997,561. Metro Transit, as stated in the business item, is replacing and also expanding our fleet. And so these 143 base order buses over the next 3 years will be used to meet those fleet plan needs. In particular, these buses comprise the fleet for our Orange Line BRT service, the balance of the D-Line buses, B-Line buses, and our regular articulated bus commuter express replacements. The request for proposals was advertised October 28th of last year. There are 8 registered plan holders for this project. The proposals were received in December, and 1 proposal was received, and that was from New Flyer of America. The staff involved reviewed that. Procurement conducted an adequate competition determination to ensure that there was no indication the solicitation specs were restrictive and that there was adequate opportunity for competition. Office of Equal Opportunity did not set a DBE goal for this project because like the last business item for buses that I presented, it is federally funded and requires proposers to comply with an FTA DBE requirement for rolling stock. The evaluation panel that was assembled, evaluated, and used their knowledge and expertise from a variety of disciplines to make a recommendation, including quality, qualifications, experience, price, and then ability to meet our current and future needs. This proposal, as submitted by New Flyer of America, was highly ranked, provided a very fair and favorable price for the council of $747,897 per bus. When we compare this to a similarly equipped bus purchased on the 2014 contract, this price is about 1.6% higher, whereas the index for inflation over the last 7 years is closer to 15%. The award and execution of contracts for rolling stock does require council approval. We applied the Thrive lens for this project, like all procurements, and it does advance outcomes through regional livability, sustainability, and prosperity. Funding for the bus purchases will be approved by the council and into the authorized capital budget through amendments as funding is available and buses are procured off this contract. And I will say that there is no known opposition to this project, but I do want to address why we do not have electric buses as part of this procurement, just very briefly. This was raised at a prior business item when we had 40-foot buses, and it's a very legitimate question. And I just want to start off by saying that Metro Transit does remain committed to evaluating that technology. We're committed to looking for opportunities, and we're learning a lot from our C-Line pilot project that's been underway since June of 2019, and what that is teaching us about next steps. In this particular procurement, we do not believe that the battery electric buses that are currently available are the right fit. The orange line in particular does have a propulsion type specified in the grant agreement that would not allow for an electric bus propulsion. The D and B line routes, their profile was examined to determine whether or not they've made a good fit for electric buses with on-route charging. Because of the length and route scheduling that takes place, they're not a good application for this. And frankly, we are learning quite a bit about the BRT experience on the C-Line currently. And then our typical use of 60-foot buses is on more of the express commuter service. And so over the next several years, if we return to a more traditional service plan, that's likely where these buses would end up, which does not necessarily align exactly with our goals or what we need to learn about how to integrate electric buses into our operation, especially on our core urban local routes. And so I'm excited that we're going to be able to get to come back for an item that's already on the standing agenda to talk about our electric bus pilot program. It's at the end of March or early April. And to just reiterate that we are continuing to look for opportunities and explore examples. We are undertaking in concert with our facilities department the overall planning that's required to make a larger commitment and a bigger expansion of our bus fleet here at Metro Transit. We continue to work through the PUC and Excel Energy grant opportunities to look for opportunities to fund some 40-foot buses so we can gain that urban local experience. And finally, the FTA announced a 2021 low and no grant emission program that we're fully invested in creating an opportunity for and submitting an application to try to make that our next pilot project. So with that, I just wanted to make sure that everyone understood that this is something we do take seriously and are committed to, but do not feel that this would be the right procurement for that.
All right. Thank you, Brian. Are there any questions from council members? Councilmember Fredson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Brian. Do we know if the buses are going to be made in Minnesota, either at the St. Cloud or Crookston plant, or we don't know that yet?
So I can't say that for sure, although our experience tells us that we'll have that ability to have them made here at the St. Cloud plant. So I can't commit until we start to issue our notice to proceed and go with the builds. But I fully expect that there'll be an opportunity for that.
Thank you.
All right. Any additional questions? Councilmember Chambliss.
Yeah,
We can't hear you.
you said there were 8 project plan holders for the project. I'm assuming those are, you meant people who might have been eligible to apply. Is that correct?
Madam Chair and Council Member, that's correct.
Okay. So for a normal purchase like this, I know since we've had biodiesel around for a while, do you normally get more than one vendor to come forward?
Madam Chair and Council Members, so right now in the transit bus market for the 60-foot articulated type of bus, there's really 2 primary players who may be likely to bid. And I believe that, I can correct this if I'm wrong, but when I was part of the evaluation panel for the 2014 procurement, I believe that we had 2 bidders and ultimately ended up going with New Flyer in that contract as well.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll correct and say that the 8 plan holders are both the two bus manufacturers, but then also those who are subcomponent manufacturers that would be party to the procurement.
All right, thank you.
All right, any additional questions or comments? All right, seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve business item 2021-53.
Councilmember Cummings
Oh,
has
Councilmember
I have
Cummings.
a question. Sorry. Mr. Punk, can you just explain a little bit about how the option to purchase additional buses would work? And so does that mean that the price that we are paying is guaranteed during this payment, during this contract period, regardless of when we would order additional buses if we choose to? Or how does that option work?
Right, Madam Chair and Councilmember Cummings. So the way that the contract is specified is that we're going to have a defined price for each year that those buses are exercised. And so that's something that does get negotiated into the contract. So we do have price certainty regardless of when those options are purchased.
And a follow-up, thank you, Madam Chair. And then are we obligated to purchase at those prices from New Flyer during this contract period?
Madam Chair and Councilmember Cummings, I know that Procurement Director Jacoby is on as well, but my understanding is that when we sign this contract, and if we were to exercise options under this contract, we would pay that agreed upon price, yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any additional questions, comments? I'll pause longer this time. All right, so seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve business item 2021-53.
It's Councilmember Fredson. I move approval.
Moved by Councilmember Fredson. Is there a second?
Second by Chambliss.
Seconded by Chambliss. Is there any other discussion? Before we proceed with the vote, I will note that Jody Jacoby did put in the chat box that there is no obligation to purchase the options. Okay. All right. So is there any other discussion? All right. Seeing and hearing none. Jenna, could you call the roll, please?
Chambliss? Chambliss?
Aye.
Cummings?
Aye.
Ferguson?
Aye.
Fredson?
Aye.
Gonzalez?
Aye.
Sterner? Zirin? Barber?
Aye. That the motion carries. Next round to business item 2021-54, a same week item. It's the 2021 Safety Performance Measure Targets, and we have Heidi Schalberg here to present.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. I will also be co-presenting today with Jed Hansen, who has been our intern since the end of May last year. So he's been doing a great job working virtually this whole time. He's wrapping up his final year in the master's program in planning at the University of Minnesota and has done a lot of great work for us on the safety targets. So I will start the presentation and then hand it off to Jed. Next slide, please. So this is basically an annual business item that you may remember having seen in previous years, where as an MPO, we have federal requirements to adopt annual targets for 5 federally required safety performance measures. So we're required to track the number of traffic fatalities, the number of serious injuries, the rates for those two, and then the number of pedestrian and bicycle fatalities and serious injuries. Next slide, please. So this is something that we can either choose to set a number for the region, which is what we have typically done since this requirement started, or simply state that we support the state targets. One key difference for us as an MPO that differs from our friends at the state DOT is that state DOTs are reviewed by the Federal Highway Administration on an annual basis to assess if they're making significant progress in meeting their targets. And if they are not, they have some financial repercussions with using certain parts of federal transportation funds. So at the MPO level, we do not have that annual federal review. So aside from just the on the ground implications of how many people are killed and seriously injured, there's not additional review in whether or not we're meeting the targets. Next slide, please. This is just basically a timeline. MPOs have 180 days after the state DOTs set their targets. We met initially with a work group I'll talk a little bit about later in December to come up with a recommendation for the region. It's gone through our technical committees and TAB with their support. and the 180 days would be by the end of this week. So this is why it's going the same week to council on Wednesday with your support. Next slide, please. So there's kind of two primary ways of thinking about setting these targets. And in the past, we've basically just taken what MnDOT has used as a methodology and applied it to the region. By doing this in the past, that resulted one year in actually having an increase in the targets based on the changes in what was actually happening in the ground with increases in fatalities and serious injuries. When this was going through our technical committees, this was a concern to some of our local stakeholders about sending that message about setting an increase in targets. And so really kind of the other way of thinking about it is setting kind of a baseline, especially in our context as an MPO, where we can use it simply to kind of reflect on how we're actually doing on these numbers on an annual basis and use that information to make any needed changes that we might need to make in policies or investments to help us meet our longer term safety goals. Next slide, please. Did just want to briefly review, of course, our overall goal at the state level, which the region supports, is that we eventually have 0 people dying or seriously injured from traffic crashes. But in the intermediate term, we do have these annual targets, and did just kind of want to review that 2019 is the most current year of finalized crash data that we have. The state is still finalizing the 2020 numbers. These numbers do apply to the full MPO planning region, so it includes the 7-county region plus the urbanized portions of Wright and Sherburne counties in the MPO planning area. And if we just look at what our targets were for 2019 versus what actually happened, we did come under our targets, meet our targets for annual serious injuries, and then the pedestrian and bicycle fatalities and serious injuries. We did not meet the target for annual traffic fatalities, and then the 2 associated rates with those. I will say that from the preliminary 2020 numbers, just for the 7-county region, we are seeing that those numbers indicate for the annual traffic fatalities that we have 116 people who died in the region last year, which is a little bit higher than what our 2020 target was. So it's just to give you a snapshot of where we've been at with that. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned briefly, we did, as part of the recommendation last year, was to create kind of an ad hoc work group with some of our local stakeholders to help us identify what the best methodology would be for the region to set these targets, rather than just simply always following what MnDOT has done in the past. And so we did have a work group that met in December with some of our stakeholders from counties, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and then of course our partners at MnDOT that work on performance measure and safety related work. Jed did a lot of work reviewing for us what other MPOs were doing and how they handled this annual requirement. And so the work group reviewed potential methodologies and then ended up coming up with kind of a modified version of one of those for its recommendation, which is before you today. With that, I'll hand it over to Jed. Next slide, please.
Hello. So to provide some context, we'd like to overview how MnDOT has changed their methodology for determining the state targets. Their targets are now based on their strategic highway safety plan goals. So in that plan, the state had set a goal of no more than 225 traffic deaths and 980 serious injuries by 2025. They then set their state targets on a downward trend based on prior year performance towards this 2025 goal. To reach the goal, fatalities must decrease by about 23 per year. However, since this method is influenced by actual crash outcomes, if fatalities increase in a particular year, there's a chance that MnDOT's new methodology may result in targets that are greater than prior year. Next slide, please. After reviewing target setting options, the work group recommended using a 4th methodology developed through discussion. This method seeks to reach our region's share of MnDOT's strategic highway safety plan goals by 2025. This method sets the region's targets on a decline consistent with the statewide plan. It also ensures the targets do not increase from year to year, as the target is based on a goal rather than outcomes. Under this method, the target allows us to evaluate our performance towards reaching the plan goals. In 2021, this means holding over our targets from 2020, and in future years, it means reducing our targets annually by approximately 8 fatal injuries, 67 serious injuries, and 17 pedestrian and bicycle fatal and serious injuries. Next slide, please. This table illustrates the progress towards reaching that strategic highway safety plan goal. The council will still be asked to set targets annually. Based off the average performance from 2015 to 2019, staff calculated our region's share of the 2025 statewide goals, which are shown in the last row on that table there. The goal in 2025 would be 74 fatalities, 464 serious injuries, and 115 non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. As you can see on the table, targets would decline each year to reach this goal. And the target that we are asking you to set today is shown on the top row there for 2021. And I will pass it back to Heidi.
Thanks, Jed. That concludes what we wanted to present to you today. We'd be happy to try to answer any questions you might have. Otherwise, we would be looking for your support in recommending adoption of these targets for 2021.
Very good. Thank you, Heidi and Jed. Any questions from council members? All right. Councilmember Fredson.
Thank you, Chair. I would just say I think we're approaching 400 deaths on our roads in transportation systems statewide, not just in the metro. So it seems like we actually have a smaller percentage of fatalities compared to the in the metro compared to the state. Just didn't know if you had any comments on that. And then the other question I had was, do we know how we compare to other sort of like metro regions as it relates to fatality rates?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Councilmember Fredson. You're correct that overall, just kind of from some of the preliminary data, that we saw that fatalities were up last year statewide overall. But when we were looking at the preliminary numbers, again, just for the 7-county region, which is just a little bit easier to get on that quicker basis at the county level, we were actually down a little bit last year, kind of in contrast to the statewide trend. I will say kind of when we look historically, kind of what our average tends to be, we tend to represent about 29 to 30% of all traffic fatalities. However, I will say that when you look at pedestrians and bicyclists, that's where the region really does have a higher share of those. So I think pedestrians, it's usually around about 45% of all of the state's traffic fatalities for pedestrians happen in the metro region, and about half for bicyclists happen in the region. So it is something that does look a little bit different once you break out those modes. And that was kind of part of the idea behind that federal requirement with including those two modes broken out separately. So I would say as far as metros, I would say generally just there's kind of an annual report on pedestrians specifically that we tend to do better in comparison to other metro regions with that. And I would say overall Minnesota has done a lot of work on safety with the state DOT level in the partnership with DPS. But we also do kind of look at the numbers too, where we still have people who aren't making it home or have kind of life-altering injuries as well. So kind of that overall framing of understanding that until we get to 0, that's kind of an unacceptable number that we're at that we'd like to change.
Thank you. Are there additional questions or comments from council members? All right, seeing and hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve business item 2021-54, same week.
Motion to approve by Chambliss.
Moved by Chambliss. Is there a second?
Second by Gonzalez.
Seconded by Gonzalez. Is there any other discussion? Seeing and hearing none, Jenna, could you call the roll?
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Ferguson,
Aye.
Fredson,
Aye.
Gonzalez,
Aye.
Sterner, Zirin, Barber.
Aye. With that, the motion carries. Thank you, Heidi and Jed. So council members, that comes to the end of our business for the evening. I would recommend that both items move non-consent to the full council. The second one, because it's the same week item, but I think the dollar amount and the nature of the first one would be good to go in front of the whole council. So if you agree? Okay,
Mhm.
very good. Then we're going to move on to our information items. The first line is a Beeline draft corridor plan. We have Adam Smith and Katie Roth here to present.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, everyone. My name is Adam Smith. I'm a senior planner in the BRT projects office, and I'm pleased to be here this afternoon to provide an update on the Beeline. Go ahead and the next slide, please. So just an overview on the Beeline BRT. As many folks know, it's looking at the substantial replacement of Route 21, which has historically been the second highest ridership bus route in our system, but the slowest in service. The pandemic, ridership on Route 21 has remained relatively strong, really underscoring the importance of a lot of the trips that this route serves, along with the variety of trip types along this corridor. At this point, the project is fully funded and is targeting an opening in 2024. Just a reminder in terms of project goals for the Beeline, it's really looking at providing faster, more reliable transit trip times across the corridor, improving the transit experience both at the stop and on vehicles, expanding equitable access to destinations, and really providing efficient connections to both the existing and planned transit network in our region. Next slide. So in terms of the broader project schedule, initial corridor recommendations and station planning was really the focus of 2019 and 2020. So at this point today, with the release of the draft corridor plan, we are looking for public feedback on the platform level of detail for each of the stations. With the feedback, we will be looking to bring a recommended corridor plan to the council for a formal release for public comment in May, followed by to bring a final corridor plan to the council for approval in September. At that point, the project would really transition formally to the engineering phase, continue into 2022, with construction beginning the following year in 2023. Next slide, please. So just, as a sort of background in terms of the planning work that has been done to date, very early on in the planning for the process, we heard a lot of stakeholder interest, particularly in the city of St. Paul, about extending the project from what was then the eastern terminus at Snellingham University to Union Depot in downtown St. Paul. So in November 2019, we did release corridor recommendations for the project, which included this extension, along with a recommended alignment through the Midway area, and identified 33 preliminary station locations based on key factors like ridership, connecting transit service, station spacing, those sorts of stuff. So at that point, we did some engagement around this. And I think that was something that was a lesson learned for this project from previous arterial BRT projects, was really bringing out these preliminary station locations. And now at this point where we are honing in on the platform level of detail. So which corners of each of these intersections should host a BRT Beeline platform. Next slide, please. So again, the key component of the corridor plan, of the draft plan, is really identifying those station locations and the locational platforms within each of the intersections. And the council's action through the planning phase is really setting those station locations in place at the platform level. So this planning process is the point where that decision is made. In addition to the platform locations, the draft plan also includes some additional context for the corridor, including a refined bus service plan that looks at the mix of different types of bus service within and along the Beeline corridor, as well as beginning to look at potential bus priority treatments to meet those speed and reliability goals for the project. Next slide. So as an example of this really core element of the draft plan, you can see sort of the proposed platform location. So again, after engaging around the intersection level of detail earlier on in the process, we've really been going through site by site with our agency partners to evaluate the more detailed options and review various considerations for platform location. So this includes things like bus operations, space constraints, adjacent land use, and then effects on access for pedestrians, bicyclists, effects on traffic, those sorts of considerations as well. Here's an example of at Lake Street and 36th Avenue. We can kind of see the existing location and configuration of bus stops versus what is being proposed in the draft plan for BRT platforms. Next slide. So as I mentioned, there's some additional information in this draft plan beyond those platform locations. Part of this is a refined bus service plan for not only the Beeline service, but also local service along the corridor. So Route 21, we're looking to provide local service on Lake Street between Hennepin Avenue and Minnehaha Avenue, and then service between Selby Avenue and the Midway area is being proposed to be replaced by a new local bus, Route 60, which would provide that local service and that connection between Selby Avenue and directly to the Midway area. These conceptual service plans will continue to be refined as we move toward Beeline implementation, and we'll also be evaluating Route 53 service as part of that process as well. Next slide. So as I mentioned, a key project goal for the Beeline is really speed and reliability. We're looking to improve travel times by approximately 20% in this corridor. And if you think about sort of what the typical sources of delay are for Route 21 buses today, a lot of our standard arterial BRT improvements help reduce those sources of delay. So things like increasing stop spacing, placing stops efficiently, adding off-board fare payment and all-door boarding really can help reduce the amount of time that customers are entering and exiting the buses. But based on some of the preliminary analysis that we've done to date, it looks like further improvements will be necessary to really meet those project goals for speed and reliability. And so at this point in the process, we're starting to take a closer look at bus priority treatments. And again, this is a little bit of a new item or a new phase in the process compared to previous arterial BRT projects, where we're really looking at this, taking a close in-depth look at bus priority treatments with our agency partners during the planning phase. And that's really in recognition that this corridor has some particular speed and reliability challenges. So again, this is something that we have started to look at and will be continuing to look at as the planning and engineering phases continue. Next slide, please. So in terms of outreach and engagement strategies, of course, very much influenced by COVID restrictions, but we are looking to really prioritize the project website where we have materials that really serve sort of a boiled down information, key information and station concepts from the plan, as well as the plan document, an introductory video giving folks a summary on how to, what the project is and how to comment, and then comment boxes really tailored for people who might want to give feedback on one or more specific stations along the corridor. And in terms of driving, commenters and members of the public to the website, we have a number of different tactics, including direct mailings to residents and businesses along the corridor, emails to subscribers, rider alerts, and some limited in-person feedback where we can at key bus stops. And again, I mentioned, this is not the first engagement work that we've done as part of this project. So really leveraging some of those previous relationships that we've built with community organizations and neighborhood groups to continue getting out the word on plans through those means. Also looking at putting up, we'll be putting up flyers around bus stops so that people can see that and access plan materials that way, and social media. Next slide, please. So just kind of coming back to what the next steps are, and again, taking an outlook of the future steps of the project. We'll be gathering feedback from the draft corridor plan at this stage, again, really looking to get that, that localized knowledge of each of these platform locations and things that we need to be considering. We'll be continuing to work with various agencies along the corridor to develop recommendations for best priority treatments. And then, we'll look to come with a recommended corridor plan in May and release that for public comment, which would lead toward a final corridor plan that we would present to the council for approval in September of this year, prior to entering the full engineering phase, and then followed by construction. Next slide, please. And at this point, we'll be happy to entertain questions.
All right, questions from council members.
One from Reba.
Councilmember Chambliss.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the bus service plan, and I'm seeing that some of the stops have like 8 to 10 blocks between them. And that the Route 21 is going to continue to run every 30 minutes for, I guess, a large portion of the route. What would happen if Route 21 went away? What is the advantage of having Route 21?
So in the portion, Chair, Council Member, in the portion of the corridor where we have proposed continued local service, it sort of varies based on where it is. So the Route 21 between Hennepin and Minnehaha on Lake Street, that's really the most intensive segment of the Lake Street corridor in terms of existing Route 21 ridership. And so part of it is an acknowledgement of how heavy ridership is within that segment, along with the fact that it is serving neighborhoods that show the highest propensity to ride transit, and again throughout the pandemic. In terms of the proposed Route 60 in St. Paul, that has been proposed as a part of what we heard from that earlier engagement step in terms of the importance of retaining a direct connection between the Midway area and Selby Avenue. And that came about as a result of the proposed alignment for the B line no longer crossing the interstate to serve Midway.
Okay, so I take it that the Route 21 would continue to be monitored based on usage and need. So then let's just say hypothetically you keep 60 and eventually some years down the road 21, the B-line service is going so good, 21 is going to be phased out. So a person would need to pretty much be able to walk 4 blocks to get to the closest stop, if it's 8 blocks between the stops, so just kind of looking at how far they would have to walk. And that seems reasonable. I mean, for people who are used to having buses stop at every block, at least that's the way it used to be, and you used to be able to run to catch the next one, but you don't have to do that when they're running every 10 minutes. Just thinking, are you looking at that? What does it mean?
Yeah, Chair, Council Member. So, on average, the spacing between stations is about 0.4 of a mile, which is in line with our BRT stop spacing. guidelines. So, we're looking at 2 to 3 stops per mile, and based on where Route 21 users board the bus today, it's 83% of current Route 21 riders would either be boarding the bus at the same location or within a block of the same location based on the stations that are proposed. So, we're really capturing a large majority of folks within a block from where they currently access the Route 21 today.
Okay, thank you.
And Katie, you might want to add on to this. I will just say I remember with the engagement we did with the Sea Line, it's just once you get out into the community, they really want to see that local route still maintained for at least moving around in their own communities. If you're out running errands or things like that. And I remember a lot of our public engagement, that was a topic that came up was, yes, we love the ABRTs, but we still want to have our local bus so we can get around in our community.
Yeah, Madam Chair and council members, I think that what we see in the service plan represented here for the B-Line is pretty consistent with what we've brought out for previous arterial BRT projects in the past, in that we've got the local underlay. I think one step that we've taken with this corridor is to even refine further where we're proposing that local service to serve the greatest need and do so in a way that we think is most sustainable in the long term. And so really targeting that stretch of Lake Street between Minnehaha and Hennepin, where ridership is highest and there's that greatest need for additional capacity. And we think the most demand for the mix of the two services, a space between Minnehaha and Snelling where we would not propose underlying service, and really focus on getting those stations in the right places to serve as many people as possible, but without that kind of underlying safety net. And then drawing that new connection to the Midway for folks on Selby Avenue. So I think what we're seeing here is what we believe is a good balance toward approaching both that question of having the mix of services that people want and will ride in the corridor, and doing so in a way that sets us up for long-term sustainable operations.
Sounds good.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Any other? Yeah, no problem. Councilmember Fredson.
Chair Adam and Katie, for all your work on this. Obviously, we're really excited to have the B-Line. 2024 can't come soon enough. If you could just go back to slide 7 really quickly. I just wanted to confirm the route for that, or proposed route for the new 60. So is it would buses in both directions on the combination of University, Snelling, Selby, and was it Marion?
Yeah, council member and chair. So this preliminary map for Route 60 does show
John Ireland. Yep.
Yes. So it shows a sort of connection to Capitol Rice Street Station on the Green Line in the east with a short loop in that area, and then using Marion to get back down to Selby, and then Hamlin to University, and then doing a similar thing with Pascal to St. Anthony to Snelling to University on the western end. But,
and
yeah.
can you sorry to interrupt, Chair.
Good.
Yeah. Can you explain what that? So I'm a little confused. You have the crossover at Hamlin, but does it circulate around, say, Allianz Field there? It appears.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Additional questions or comments? All right. Well, I just want to make a quick comment. And it was really like, if you took a look at that slide that was just up there, I think Councilmember Chambliss talked early on in our comments at the beginning of the meeting about how we're really trying to build a system that's connected. The B-Line connects things. B-Line connects to LRTs. It connects to several of our ABRTs. It connects to the Orange Line. I think that just sort of that vision and planning of kind of pulling this all together, I think really shows that we've been thoughtful in how we've done this. So thank you all for your hard work. It's much appreciated. Councilmember Fredson.
Yeah, Chair, one more comment, which is just, if you think about what the communities and the neighborhoods have been through over the course of the last year, this investment is just so needed, and we look forward to it.
Very good. All right. Any last words from council members? All right. Thank you, Adam and Katie. Nice work. All right. Next, we are on to Metro Transit's role in emergency powers. We have Vince Pellegrin, Brian Funk, and Chief Frizzell joining us today.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Vince Pellegrin. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at Metro Transit. Today, Brian Funk and Chief Frizzell and I are going to tag team a presentation for you, talk a little bit about our emergency preparedness at Metro Transit. This opening slide here, I just wanted to direct your attention. You can see the bus on, don't panic there. The bus, we actually put that bus on its side on purpose with a tow truck. This is what we call a full-scale exercise that was part of the full funding grant agreement from the Green Line. This picture was taken, this was actually on the university campus right there by TCF Bank Stadium in May of 2014.